There is a sound a storm makes when it is hiding something inside it. I didn't know that before Alaska. I know it now. It's lower than wind. It's underneath the wind, the way a hand is underneath a glove. And once you've heard it, you never stop listening for it, even years later, even in a warm apartment in a city where it never snows. The last storm I logged at Station 7 did not have a name. It came across the radar at 3:14 in the morning as a smooth gray mass with no rotation, no front, no temperature gradient, none of the things a storm is supposed to have. It just slid toward us across the tundra like something being poured. And as it got closer, every instrument in the control room agreed on one impossible fact. The temperature inside the storm was rising. I remember picking up the radio to report it. I remember the procedure. I remember my supervisor, Halloran, putting his hand flat on the console, not grabbing the radio, not stopping me, just resting his hand there, the way you'd quiet a child, and saying, very softly, "We don't log that one." I asked him why. He looked at the window, at the white nothing pressing against the glass, and he said the only honest thing anyone said to me the entire time I worked there. Because it can hear us writing it down. And then the lights went out, and for 11 minutes, I counted every second, something walked around the outside of the building in the dark. This is what happened. As much of it as I can still trust. I want to be clear about something before I tell you the rest. I was not an interesting person. I want you to understand that, because the kind of people this happens to are never interesting. I was 26. I had a degree in atmospheric science that wasn't getting me anywhere, a small debt, and a quiet talent for being alone without feeling sorry about it. That last part, I think, is why they hired me. The posting was for a remote meteorological data technician. Northern Alaska, well above the Brooks Range, in a part of the map where the place names stop and the contour lines just go white. The contract was 9 months. The pay was good, better than good, honestly, better than the work seemed to justify, which should have been my first question and wasn't. The interview was on the phone. A flat, patient voice asked me 3 things: whether I had family who would expect frequent contact, whether I had ever been treated for any condition affecting memory or perception, and whether I could follow a written procedure exactly even when it didn't make sense to me. I said no, and yes. The voice said, "Good. That last one matters more than the others." I should have heard that. I didn't. They flew me in on a small twin engine out of Fairbanks, then transferred me to something smaller and louder for the last leg. I watched the trees thin out, and then stop entirely. After that it was just snow and the shadows of clouds moving across the snow, and the occasional black thread of a frozen river. No roads. No towns. Nothing that a human being had made. And then, out of all that emptiness, the station. Station 7 was 3 low buildings connected by enclosed walkways, sitting on a slight rise above the flat white. There was a radar dome on a tower, a cluster of antennas, a fuel depot, and a 4th structure set apart from the others, farther down the slope, that nobody mentioned and I learned not to ask about. From the air it looked like a research base. From the ground, after a few weeks, it would start to look like something else. A trap, maybe? A blind, the kind hunters build. The man who met me at the landing pad was Halloran. Mid-50s, gray, with the particular stillness of someone who has stopped expecting things to go well. He didn't smile. He shook my hand once and said, "You'll want to get inside. It's only -30 today, but the wind makes it lie." That was the first thing anyone said to me at Station 7. The wind makes it lie. I thought he was talking about the temperature. Inside, the station was warmer than I expected and emptier than I expected. Fluorescent lights, the long humming kind, in every corridor. Linoleum floors. The smell of coffee that had been reheated too many times and the fainter, colder smell underneath everything that I never identified, something like ozone, something like the inside of a freezer. There were 6 of us in total. Halloran, the supervisor. A woman named Petrova who ran the instruments, and almost never spoke. 2 technicians, Cole and Dunmore, who worked opposite shifts and seemed to have agreed years ago to keep their conversations to the weather. A cook and general hand named Eddie, who was the only one of them who seemed like a person you might meet in the regular world. And then me. The routine was explained to me on the first night by Halloran, over a meal of canned stew, in a voice that suggested he had explained it many times before and expected to explain it many times again. We logged the weather. That was the job. Every hour on the hour, we recorded temperature, barometric pressure, wind speed and direction, humidity, visibility, and cloud cover. We tracked storm systems on the radar as they came in off the Arctic, and we relayed our observations by radio to a relay station I never saw and never spoke to a single human being at, just a tone, an acknowledgement, a confirmation that the data had been received. We maintained the equipment. We kept the generators running. We did not go outside during a storm, ever, for any reason, no matter what we heard. That last rule was delivered exactly like the others. Same flat tone. No emphasis. As if, don't go outside during a storm no matter what you hear, was the same kind of instruction as, log the pressure every hour. I asked the obvious question. What would I hear? Halloran chewed for a while before he answered. Then he said, the wind does a lot of things up here. You'll get used to it. The rule is just so you don't get curious. It was a good answer. It was almost a true answer. It took me weeks to understand that, almost true, was the native language of Station 7, and that everyone there was fluent in it. The first month was genuinely boring. I want to be honest about that too, because the boredom matters. The horror doesn't arrive all at once. It arrives the way frostbite does. You don't feel it taking your fingers, you just notice later that part of you has stopped responding. I logged the weather. I learned the instruments. I learned the rhythm of the station, the way the generators cycled, the way the radar swept, the way the long dark of the Arctic winter settled over everything so that day and night became words without meaning, just numbers on a clock and the eternal blue-black outside the windows. I learned the people a little. Eddie taught me to play cribbage. Petrova showed me how to recalibrate the barometer without being asked, which I came to understand was her version of friendship. Cole and Dunmore nodded at me in the corridor. Halloran watched me, in a way that I mistook for suspicion and later understood was something closer to grief. And I learned the first strange thing, though I didn't know yet that it was strange. Some storms didn't get logged. It started with the log books. We kept everything digitally, of course, but Halloran also insisted on paper logs, physical books, handwritten, one per month, stored in a locked cabinet in the records room. He said it was redundancy, in case of a power failure. I believed that, because it was a reasonable thing to believe. In my second month, I was asked to transcribe some older paper logs into the digital system, a cleanup task, the kind of busy work they give you to fill the quiet hours. And as I worked through them, I started to notice gaps. Not missing pages. The pages were all there, numbered, intact. But there were gaps in the weather. A log would record a clear, calm night, pressure steady, wind light, visibility unlimited, and then the next hourly entry, 60 minutes later, would record the aftermath of a major storm. Snow accumulation of 40 centimeters. Drifts against the north wall. Equipment iced over. As if a blizzard had come and gone in a single hour, and nobody had written down a word of it. The first time I saw it, I assumed it was an error. A skipped entry, a transcription mistake from years ago. But it happened again. And again. And the pattern, once I saw it, was unmistakable. Every few weeks, there was a storm that left evidence but no record. The instruments had clearly registered it. The aftermath proved that. But the human log went silent for exactly the duration of the event, and then picked up again afterward as if nothing had happened. I brought it to Halloran. I thought I was being helpful. I thought I'd found a flaw in the record-keeping. He looked at the log I'd flagged for a long time. Then he closed it, gently, and said, "Those are clerical gaps. They happen during heavy weather when we're too busy to log. Don't worry about backfilling them. Leave them blank." "But the instruments caught it," I said. I could reconstruct the data from the digital. Leave them blank, he said again. And there was something underneath his voice that hadn't been there before. Not anger. A kind of carefulness. The way you tell someone to leave a sleeping animal alone. So I left them blank. But I started watching. The radio was the next thing. Our communications with the relay station followed a script. We sent our hourly data, we received a confirmation tone, occasionally we received a brief instruction or a weather advisory from somewhere further south. Routine. Mechanical. But during certain storms, the unnamed kind, I would later understand, the radio did something else. The confirmation tone would change. Normally it was a single clean note, the same every time. During those storms it would come back wrong, flattened, or doubled, or stretched out like a recording played too slow. Once it came back and underneath the tone, very faint, there was something that sounded like breathing. Slow, deliberate, with a wet edge to it. I told myself it was static. Static doesn't breathe. But I told myself it was static, because the alternative was unthinkable, and I was still, at that point, capable of telling myself things. I asked Cole about it once, in the corridor, trying to make it casual. I said the relay's confirmation tone had sounded strange during the last bit of heavy weather. Cole stopped walking. He didn't look at me. He said, "You don't listen to the radio during those. You wait for the light on the panel, you walk away. You don't listen. There's a procedure for that? There's a procedure for everything," he said. "You'll learn them. The ones they wrote down, and the ones they didn't." And then he walked away, and I noticed, I will never forget this, that his hands were shaking, and that he was holding them against his sides to make them stop. The safety routines were the third thing, and the strangest. When one of the unnamed storms was coming, and the staff always seemed to know before the radar did, hours before, the way animals know, the station changed. Quietly. Without announcement. Petrova would go around and tape over the windows with thick black plastic, sealing every gap, every crack of glass. Eddie would unplug certain devices and leave others running. Cole or Dunmore would walk the corridors with a handheld pressure gauge, checking readings at specific points, marking them on a clipboard, frowning at numbers I couldn't see. And everyone would stop talking about anything that mattered. I don't know how else to describe it. During a normal storm, the station was the station, people complained, people joked, Eddie cooked, Petrova was silent in her ordinary way. But during one of those storms, a different silence came down. A held-breath silence. People spoke only in short functional sentences, only about tasks, and they watched each other in a way that I came to recognize as a kind of mutual guarding. As if any one of them might, at any moment, do something the others would have to stop. I asked Eddie about it. Eddie was the one I trusted. He was peeling potatoes in the kitchen, and I asked him, straight out, what everyone was so afraid of. He didn't look up from the potatoes. He said, "You ever been somewhere so quiet you could hear your own blood?" I said I had. "Now imagine," he said, "that the quiet's not empty. That it's quiet because something's holding still. Something big enough that when it holds still, the whole world holds still around it." He set down the knife. "That's what the storm is. The storm's not the weather. The storm's the holding still. The weather's just where it puts its hands." I thought he was being poetic. Eddie wasn't a poetic man. I think now that it was the most precise description of the thing that anyone at Station 7 was capable of giving me. That was also around the time the memory problems started. Small at first. I'd finish a log entry and not remember writing it, though the handwriting was mine. I'd go to bed at the end of a shift and wake up not certain whether a day had passed or two. Once I found a note in my own handwriting, taped to my mirror, that said "Don't count the lights." I had no memory of writing it. I still don't know what it means. I never figured out which lights, or why, or what would happen if I counted them. But I never counted them, after that. Whatever the version of me that wrote that note knew, I decided to trust him. I started keeping a private journal, separate from the station logs, hidden in my room, to fight the slipping. To have something outside my own head that I could check. It helped for a while. And then I started finding entries in the journal that I didn't remember writing, in my handwriting, describing things I didn't remember happening, and the journal stopped being a comfort and became one more thing I couldn't trust. By the third month, I understood that something was wrong with Station 7. I just didn't understand what. I thought it might be the isolation. I thought it might be the dark, the endless dark, doing to my mind what the dark does. I thought a lot of things that let me keep going. And then the storm came that I couldn't explain away. It appeared on the radar at the far edge of our range, late on a night in the deepest part of winter, when the sun had not risen in 5 weeks and was not going to rise for several more. I was on shift alone. That was normal for the overnight hours. I saw it come onto the screen and my first thought was that the radar had malfunctioned, because what it was showing me wasn't possible. A storm has structure. Even a chaotic one has structure, bands, a leading edge, a temperature gradient, motion that makes sense in terms of the systems around it. This had none of that. It was a perfect, smooth oval of gray, with a hard, clean boundary, like something drawn with a compass. It did not rotate. It did not deform as it moved. It held its exact shape and it came toward us in a straight line at a constant speed, across terrain and pressure systems that should have torn any real storm apart. And the instruments inside it were wrong. I had the remote sensor data from the outer markers, automated stations we maintained at distances around Station 7. As the storm passed over the first marker, the data came back and I read it 3 times because I didn't believe it. The temperature inside the storm was higher than the temperature outside. 20 degrees higher. 30. In the middle of the Arctic winter, this thing was carrying warmth inside it, a pocket of warmth moving across the frozen dark, and that is not a thing that weather does, that is not a thing that is allowed to happen, and I sat there alone in the control room with the fluorescent lights humming and felt, for the first time, genuine fear. I did what I was trained to do. I picked up the radio to report it. And Halloran's hand came down on the console. I hadn't heard him come in. He was just there, suddenly, beside me, and his hand was flat on the metal next to the radio, and he was looking at the screen with an expression I'd never seen on him, not surprise, never surprise, but a tiredness so deep it was almost peace. "We don't log that one," he said. I asked him why. "You already know what he told me. Because it can hear us writing it down. I want to describe what the next few hours were like, because they were the hinge of the whole thing, the point after which I could no longer pretend." The other staff came out of their rooms without being called. All of them. Petrova, Cole, Dunmore, Eddie, they came into the control area in the deep middle of the night, all at once, the way you'd respond to a fire alarm except there was no alarm, there was just the storm on the screen and some shared knowledge that ran through all of them, and not through me. They moved through the routines I'd half seen before, but faster now, with the smoothness of long practice. The black plastic over the windows. The pressure gauges at their stations. The unplugging of certain devices. Eddie went around and turned off the overhead fluorescents one bank at a time, leaving only the dim emergency lighting, red and low, and when I asked why, Petrova answered, Petrova, who never spoke, and she said, "Bright light. It comes to bright light." The storm reached the perimeter of the station around 3:14 in the morning. I know the time because it was the last thing the clock showed before the power went out. Not a flicker. Not a brownout. The power went out the way a held breath stops, completely, instantly, a total silence where the generator's hum had been. And in that silence, with the red emergency lights gone and only the faint glow of a few battery devices, I heard the storm arrive. It didn't sound like wind. I have tried for years to describe what it sounded like and I have never gotten it right, but I'll tell you the closest I've come. It sounded like a very large room with someone moving around in it. That's the wrongness of it. A storm should sound like chaos, like force, like the outdoors. This sounded enclosed. It sounded like we were inside something, and the something was inhabited, and the inhabitant was walking. And then I heard the footsteps. They went around the building. Slow. Even. Heavy, but not in the way a heavy thing is heavy, heavy in the way that pressure is heavy, so that each step seemed to push the air against my eardrums before I heard the sound itself. Around the north wall. Along the connecting walkway. Past the window where I sat in the dark with 5 other people who were not moving, not breathing loudly, not doing anything but waiting. I started to stand up. I don't know why. To look, maybe. To do something. And Halloran's hand found my shoulder in the dark and pressed me back down into the chair, and his mouth came close to my ear, and he said one word, very quietly. Don't. I counted the steps. I told you I counted. 11 minutes, the thing walked around Station 7 in the dark, and I counted the seconds and I counted the footsteps, and somewhere in the middle of it I understood that the footsteps and the seconds had stopped matching, that the thing was taking one step every few seconds but the steps were not getting it any further around the building, that it was walking and staying in the same place, just outside the window where I sat. As if it knew I was the new one, as if it was waiting for me specifically to make a sound. I did not make a sound. And then the power came back on, all at once, the generators catching with a roar, the fluorescence flooding everything with light, and the sound was gone. Just gone. Outside the black plastic on the windows, the storm was already moving away across the tundra, holding its perfect shape, taking its impossible warmth with it. Nobody said anything. Petrova began peeling the plastic off the windows. Eddie went to restart the kitchen. Cole logged the time of the power restoration in the official record, and beside it, in the column for weather conditions, he wrote a single word, clear. I looked at the radar. The storm was there, plain as anything, a perfect gray oval receding into the north. You're writing clear, I said. It's right there. Cole didn't look up. It's clear, he said. That's what the log says. That's what the log will always say. You understand? I understood that I didn't understand. And I understood, for the first time with real clarity, that everyone else did, and that they had all agreed long ago to live inside the not understanding, because the alternative was worse. That night I found the records room unlocked. I still don't know if it was a mistake or an invitation. Halloran had the only key, and Halloran was not a careless man. But the cabinet was open, and I was alone, and I had reached a point where I could no longer not look. There were files in that cabinet that did not match anything else at Station 7. The regular logs were there, the boring ones, the real weather, decades of it. But behind them, in a deeper drawer, there was a second set of records. And these were the ones I was never supposed to see. They were logs of the unnamed storms. The ones we don't write down. Except someone had written them down, not in the official record, but here, in this hidden place, in many different hands across many years. As if every person who had ever worked at Station 7 had felt the same need I felt, to put it somewhere outside their own head, and had been allowed to do it only here, in the dark, where the official record couldn't be contaminated. The earliest entries went back further than I expected. Decades. The handwriting changed, the pens changed, the paper aged, but the storms were the same. The same perfect ovals. The same impossible warmth. The same instruction, repeated in entry after entry across the years, sometimes underlined, sometimes written in a shaking hand: do not log. Do not name. Do not go out. And there were observations. Careful, frightened, meticulous observations, made by people who had clearly understood that they were studying something and that they would never be told what it was. The storms came on a cycle, the records suggested, though not a regular one, long gaps, then clusters. They always approached from the north, from the direction of the deep ice. They always carried warmth. And this was the part that I read over and over, sitting on the cold floor of the records room. They were getting closer. Not in distance. In behavior. The early records described storms that passed the station by, that walked around it and left. The more recent ones described storms that lingered. That tested the windows. That had begun, in the last few years, to respond. To go quiet when the station went quiet. To come toward bright light. To pause outside the window where the newest worker sat. There was a phrase that appeared again and again, going back to the very oldest entries, and I think it was the closest anyone ever came to explaining what the thing was. It wasn't a name. Names were forbidden. It was a description, and it was always written the same way, as if it had been passed down, as if it were the one fact everyone at Station 7 was permitted to know. It is not in the storm. The storm is how it moves through the cold without freezing. The warmth is its body. We do not study the weather. We watch the warmth, and we count the days between, and we make sure no one writes it a name, because a thing with a name can be called, and a thing that can be called can be answered. I read that, alone, in the dark, and I understood why no one at Station 7 ever fully explained anything. They didn't explain it because explanation is a kind of naming. To say it clearly would be to write it down. And the one rule, underneath all the other rules, the rule that the whole station existed to enforce, was that this thing must never, ever, be written down completely. I understood, then, what Station 7 was. It was not a weather station. It was a blind. A hunter's blind set on the path of something that walked through the cold, manned by people whose only job was to watch it pass and to make sure it was never recorded, never named, never made real in any official way that the world outside could find. And I understood what had happened to the people I worked with. Petrova's silence. Cole's shaking hands. Halloran's grief. They were not broken because they had seen something terrible. They were broken because they had spent years holding still, holding quiet, holding the line, knowing that the thing in the storms was learning, was getting closer, was beginning to respond, and knowing that no one would ever come to relieve them, because to send relief would be to acknowledge that there was something here to be relieved of. Halloran found me there. On the floor. With the files open in my lap. He didn't get angry. That was the worst part. He sat down on the floor across from me, an old man with his back against a filing cabinet, and he looked at me for a long time, and then he said, "Now you know why we don't talk about it." "What is it?" I asked him. "You read the file," he said. "You know we don't answer that. You know why." "How long?" I said. "How long have you been here?" He thought about it. He actually had to think about it, and that was when I understood that the memory problems weren't just me, that the thing in the storms did something to time, to memory, to the people who watched it, year after year. "I came up for a 9-month contract," he said finally. "I think it was a 9-month contract." He almost smiled. "You stopped being able to leave. Not because they stop you. Because you can't make yourself stop watching. Because if you leave, who watches? And what happens to all of us down south if there's a winter and nobody's at the window?" I asked him the only question that mattered. I asked him if it was getting worse. And Halloran, who had told me almost nothing true since the day I arrived, looked at me with those tired, grieving eyes and gave me the second honest answer of my time at Station 7. "It paused outside your window tonight," he said. "It's never done that for a new one before. Usually takes years." He got to his feet slowly, his knees cracking in the cold. "It knows you now. That's the thing about this place. Once it knows you're watching it, it starts watching back." I left Station 7 6 weeks later, when the contract rotation finally came and a plane could land. I want to tell you that I solved something. That I uncovered the truth, or stopped it, or even fully understood it. I didn't. I logged the weather. I watched the storms, the real ones, and twice more the other kind, the warm ones with the perfect edges. I taped the windows. I sat in the dark and did not make a sound. I held the line, for 6 more weeks, the way they all held it, and I came to understand the silence from the inside, came to understand that there is nothing to say about a thing like that, that talking about it is the one thing you must not do. The last warm storm came 2 nights before my plane. I was on shift. I saw it cross the outer marker, carrying its impossible heat. I reached for the radio out of pure habit, and then I stopped, because I knew now, I was one of them now, I knew that we don't log that one. And I sat in the dark with the others, and the power went out, and the thing walked around the building. It paused outside my window again. Longer this time. And in the silence, in the hell-breath dark, I heard it do something it had never done before. Right against the glass, just past the black plastic, inches from my face. It exhaled. A long, slow, warm exhale, and the cold glass of the window fogged from the outside, in the shape of breath, and I sat absolutely still and I did not make a sound and I thought, with a calm that frightened me more than any panic could have, it's saying goodbye. It knows I'm leaving. It wants me to remember that it knows. The power came back. The storm moved off. Cole logged the night as clear. When the plane came, Halloran walked me out to the pad. He shook my hand once, the way he had the day I arrived. He didn't tell me to take care of myself. He didn't tell me anything. At the last moment, as I was climbing in, he said one thing, raising his voice over the engine. "When you're back down south," he said, "and there's a winter storm, and it's warm, warmer than it should be." He stopped. He looked north, at the white nothing. "Don't write it down," he said. "Don't tell anyone. Just count the days till the next one. And don't ever give it a name." That was 4 years ago. I live in a city now where it rarely snows. I have a normal job. I do not work with weather anymore. I tried, for the first year, to find Station 7 on a map, in records anywhere, to prove to myself that it had been real. I couldn't find it. There is no Station 7 in any meteorological registry I can access. The contract paperwork I signed lists an address that doesn't exist. The money was real. The money is still in my account. But the place itself, officially, is nowhere. It was never logged. Of course it was never logged. That was the whole point. I checked my old journal, the one I kept hidden in my room up there. Most of the pages are blank now. Not torn out. Blank. Pages I know I filled, in handwriting I know was mine, are empty, as if the ink simply left. The only entry that remains is one I don't remember writing, near the back, 3 words, pressed so hard into the paper that the pen nearly tore through. It followed me. I don't know if that's true. That's the thing I want you to understand, the thing I can't get past, the reason I'm telling you this at all. I don't know what's true anymore. My memory of those 9 months has gaps in it, the exact shape of the storms, clear, then suddenly the aftermath, with nothing in between. I don't know how many of the warm storms I actually saw. I don't know if the thing exhaled against my window or if I dreamed it. I don't know if Halloran was real, or if I invented a kind old man to make the silence bearable. But here is what I know. Last week there was a storm in the city, in this place where it rarely snows. And it was warm. Warmer than it should have been. The snow came down soft and wet in air that felt almost like spring, and the meteorologists on the news talked about unusual systems, and warm fronts, and the things that meteorologists say. And I sat in my apartment in the dark, with the lights off, very still, and I did not write it down. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't give it a name. I just counted the days till the next one. I'm on day 6.